my funny stories become a learning experience for somebody else, that's how this is supposed to go. But third lines have this tendency to be really beat down by the world, and then by others, and then themselves. Even being a 3-6 profile, I have this 6 quality in me that has this maturing aspect. And it's almost like sometimes the 6 side of me, you know, is so happy to be done with the below the roof problems that it tends to look at it like, oh, thank God we're not down there. And yet the irony is that half of my profile is still this third line. I will never get rid of this third line side of me, but it's being kind of tempered with this 6 that's like, yeah, that was rough, but up here, it hurts so much less. It's quite interesting trying to process on the roof. Well, still, you know, my personality is not on a roof. My personality is like down in the thick of it all the time. So even with me, like I noticed there was this aspect of me that was like, well, at some point we'll grow up, you know, like she's a little judgy. She's a little bit like, not judgy, but she's like, she's got herself up there. She's looking down in a way that says like, she's kind of looking down on a lot of her past experience. And I didn't like that one day. I noticed that the way that I was talking about my past experiences had this tone of like, me trying to like soften the blow or like really talk about what I had learned from it, you know. But I have stories. I have stories from really like under 22 years old. My life was quite, honestly, I feel like my life was really intense from 11 to 21. The trial and error process at that point in my life was really intense. And my mom has said to me so many times, Sam, you should write TV shows. You should write movies. You should write books. The closest I have gotten is my podcast, and this is venturing into that territory. I have some phenomenal stories. They're really funny. Like, I see myself as like a pretty like good girl. And yet, you know, the story of how I got my criminal record is pretty hilarious. I've had a criminal record since I was 20 years old, and it on one hand doesn't match me at all. On the other hand, totally matches me. And the story is so funny. My criminal record had me brought up on 8 criminal charges. Part of this story is that I turned myself in to the police. The day they sentenced me, the Crown prosecutor started his opening statements with, "Your Honor, she turned herself in." Nobody does that. They dropped all of my charges except one. I maintained a criminal record. It's a hell of a story. You can see me light up as I talk about this. Because you know what? That's not negatively affecting my life right now. I'm not in the middle of losing access to things. Like, I've paid the price. I've been through the consequences. Like, I learned my lesson. It's one hell of a story now. And yet, if you're not a third line at all and you hear that story, you might be like, what the hell's wrong with you? You know? And that's how a lot of people have looked at it. Like, you know, 5 out of the 6 profiles are like, and the 6th line profile's like, it's really freaking out, even though it really understands. That's why it's freaking out more, because it understands what that first part of life was like. This video, I needed to get something out. I could tell that something was coming from me that needed to come out. I feel very differently about being a third line now than I have for the last 5 years. Like, ever since learning about the third line, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Shame spiral. And I know that it's not about that. I know that the value is in the trial and error. I know that the value is in this didn't work, but this does. I know there's so much value in this. I know it's not really supposed to come with shame. Those are the not self qualities. But part of what I want to talk about, or part of what I just did talk about, I guess, what I'm wrapping up here, I feel good about being a third line. I can accept this about myself. I can love this about myself. More than anything because it's funny. I'm funny. I'm a little bit funny in these videos, but they're also edited. You know, when I say silly, goofy things, like, if I make myself laugh in the editing process, I tend to keep it in. But I'm okay with my mistakes. Because the truth is, what's often seen as a mistake is not called that from my perspective. It's called that from other people's perspectives. You know, when I do something as a third line, like when I run back into the fire to learn, you know, a lesson for the first, second, 8th, 12th time, what's interesting to me is who I choose to tell about it. If I feel loved and accepted by someone, especially, you know, it's easier. One of the things that I noticed was that when I was willing to run back into the fire, another third line person is the first person that I want to tell about it, that I want to share my experience with. In fact, I will do quite a few things that I will only talk to other third lines about because they fortify me. They remind me, like, yeah, that is cool. That is okay. You go for it. Tell me how this works out. Oh God, tell me how it turns out, you know? They can even brace with me for the crash, right? And then be like, did it hurt? Did it hurt as much as you thought it was gonna? What did you learn? You know? I love that process. I love the messy, creative, experimental, and if you fuck up, and if you mess up, there's a lesson. That lesson has so much value. I want you to think about the value of the lessons and add that to the value that you just see yourself having as a person. Third lines have a very, very hard time having high personal value. We're so used to thinking that we're messing everything up and then having everybody else back that up and be like, yeah, you are messing things up. Really hard for us to maintain a great level of personal confidence in our experiments. Raising my son has really helped me. I don't do reparenting, but raising my son is a really good way for me to witness what I've actually learned, because I never make Maven feel ashamed for messing things up. In fact, when he messes up, I go, you know, what do we say? And he's like, third lines. I'm like, yeah, man, or third lines. We're never gonna get anything right the first time. I've had to use this just to encourage Maven to do, like, to try new things, to try new sports and stuff like that. Before we try anything, any new sports, I'm like, all right, we ready to wipe out? Because we know we're gonna wipe out a couple of times before we figure this out, you know? We're the kind of people helmets were made for.